All right. Welcome, everybody. This is Dawn Reevy, and I have the pleasure of being here with Debbie Osborne. We're going to be talking about pattern analysis, really where it has evolved and where it is right now in the crime analysis field. So I want to welcome you. Welcome, Debbie. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you, Dawn. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna get going. There's so much that you have to offer in terms of legacy and building legacy and analytics, and so I want to be able to pick your brain a little bit today. But so for those of you who haven't met Debbie before, she's a retired U.S. Secret Service Investigative Analyst, and she also is a crime analyst for the Buffalo Police Department. And of course, Debbie wrote this book recently in 2023, Elements of Crime Patterns, which we're going to talk about today. We actually use this in a couple of the courses that we teach. So this is a really great book for folks who are wanting to understand and learn how to analyze crime patterns, how to actually think through the process of analyzing crime patterns. So I'm looking forward to getting started. All right. So let's do it. So I have a couple of questions for you. You have a very impressive career as the investigative analyst for the Secret Service. A lot of times when people hear Service, they get really excited. And how long were you with them for?
I was an analyst with the Secret Service for 8.5 years, only my last years of my working career. So,
Mhm, mhm. And what were you doing as a Secret Service investigative analyst?
well, a lot of people don't know, and I didn't know before knew about the job, that there's many analysts in field offices all around the country, and those analysts help support the investigations of the agents who are in the office. When agents come into the Secret Service, they don't just go protect the president. They get trained, they do investigations. When they retire, stop doing protection, they go back to the field office.
Mhm.
So so they work on white collar crime, basically, like counterfeiting, cybercrime, fraud, things
Mhm,
like
mhm.
that, financial crimes. um, so it's interesting. So I was more working on major investigations, federal
Yeah,
investigations,
excellent.
compared to local level crime analysis.
Okay. So kind of some of the same skills though that you would bring to that larger, more global level.
Well, I think I came late to the field of crime analysis in 1997. I was the first crime analyst in Buffalo for 10 years.
Oh,
Then
wow.
I left and I taught college online for a few years and went to the Secret Service. So I think it's actually, to me, it's harder to be a crime analyst because unless you're in a huge city and you're assigned one particular thing, but I was the whole city, and you
Mhm,
have so many technical skills you need. You still need them at the federal
mhm,
level, but at the federal level, you're working more on looking at target profiles, what the subject is. You have these databases to research people, and
mhm,
you're working on big investigations. But at the local level, you have crime mapping. You have, if you're doing telephone toll analysis, you might do it at the other level, but you have so much data to analyze. Your Excel skills better be like really, really good.
mhm.
And then
On point. Yeah.
the new things that I didn't use, like Power BI or whatever it is, like there's
Yep.
things I didn't do because they didn't exist when
Yep.
I didn't need them. But
Mhm,
creating dashboards, being technical,
mhm,
you're more technical, but you're also have so much. I serve so many people, right? It was
mhm.
more focused. But in the Secret Service, I also did some threat analysis too. So I feel like I've had a very wide career.
Yeah, yeah. Absolutely. So for analysts who are kind of newer to the field, I mean, I would love to know, how does one get into the Secret Service? Is there like recruitment only, or do you apply somewhere? How did it work for you?
Well, all federal jobs, just like the FBI, it's USA Jobs
Mhm,
would be where the posting is. Well, I think in FBI, there's even their own website, but federal jobs, you could work for Department of Homeland Security. You can
mhm,
work for the IRS. You can work for all sorts of agencies as an analyst. So you just have to keep on looking at announcements and build your skills, build your resume. But I don't think you always need a lot of experience. I think you need to be able to pass top secret clearance. So you have to
mhm.
be really
So,
cognizant of your behavior.
yeah,
So
yeah.
obviously I was pretty good. I was in my 50s when I got hired by the Secret Service, right? So I had,
Really? Yeah.
yeah. So find out where you lived your whole life if you moved a lot. when
Yeah.
that's really, so keep track of everything,
Mhm.
because you
Right,
have
because you have to tell them where you lived and they do some dig
everyone,
checks on
like
you.
people, foreign
Mhm.
contacts, so many things. So you really have to, you might want to talk to someone who's done it before too, to help you know what your knowledge, skills, and abilities are in
Mhm.
federal language to put it
Mhm.
on the.
That's a great idea.
Mhm.
So, two things that I'm learning right now is one, it doesn't matter your age. You can go in at any point in your career. So, that's really helpful for other analysts, I think, to know. And then two, you don't have to be recruited. You can actually just apply online and build your skill set so that you have all the analytical skills you need to
Mhm.
be a good a value added person. So that's great. Awesome. Awesome. All right. So I know everyone's here to learn about pattern analysis. And so I want to give us an opportunity to really talk about that exact thing. Looking at patterns in policing, one of the things that I find now in 2024, right, is that we're just starting to get access to the information. A lot of people in New York, right, they have a huge crime center. They all have access to information one way or another. But some of the smaller agencies with like 200 or less officers, the RMS, the vendors don't always give them that direct data access. And so now in this time, I'm seeing at least over the last maybe 5 or so years, more and more access to it, which now gives us the ability to analyze more and more patterns, right? And so, how what would be, I guess, your process for starting to look at a crime pattern?
Well, first of all, you don't look at a crime pattern. You look
Mhm.
at crime data, right? So when I started too, the reason they hired an analyst at the Buffalo Police Department is they were getting a new RMS system,
Mhm.
right? So, but they had where they posted the crimes in Lotus, what was called Lotus Notes. So every day I could read a summary of the crime for the day. So I did what many people in small agencies did. I collected my own data.
Mhm.
So even if you do get RMS access, you're still going to have missing pieces
Correct.
to the data. And what I did later in my years as a crime analyst, which I wish I would have done earlier, but you don't know till you learn,
Mhm.
is I actually kept a workbook with, say, all the delivery robberies, all
Mm.
different kinds of burglaries, say burglaries of businesses, or just things I knew
Like
were more
patterns.
likely
Yeah.
to be in a pattern.
Yeah.
And then when I got into work and I had that, I could just add to it and I could see patterns. So it
Yeah.
was like magical.
I think you brought up a really good point is that, whether or not someone does have access to a system, the reality is the system may not capture all of the elements that the analyst needs. So when I think about direct data access to a system, the whole purpose is to have a spot where you can then add your analytical notes. So whether that's through direct access and then you add your notes, or you're just creating the database and kind of keeping all your analytical key points in there. I love that you talk about, looking at the information and having the information in a spot that may just be your analytical notes. So it's in addition. A lot of folks, managers in policing, will think that you should get everything out of the system. The system is everything you need. And the reality is, it isn't. You need other analytical notes that as you begin to read and connect, you start saying, this sounds like last week's case, or this orange shoe has something to do with the case. So plugging in your information is key. So I like that.
Mhm.
Okay, so you're having these kind of notebooks, like you're calling them, that you're analyzing, and then all of a sudden, or keeping, and then all of a sudden, you start to see a crime pattern, like start to see something emerge that you think might be related to each other. So tell me about your methodology. Tell me about your process, your thinking that happens when you think that there might be, let's say, a couple of burglaries related.
Well, even before that, I'd like to say when you're newer or you don't know what you're doing, you have to find out what is the normal crime.
Mm.
Like if you
Mhm.
don't have, I came from the field of behavioral psychology. I didn't know it. I didn't work in law enforcement, so I didn't know, say the first month I decided to analyze robberies, because they didn't, they were waiting to send me to training. So I had to figure out what to do be productive. There were like 10 delivery person truck robberies, like were they stealing meat and that. So, but I think what it is you have to be first familiar with the crime, and
Mhm.
then you would say similarities. So in the book too, I go into different similarities. And of course, this is not to suggest that all criminals just do everything the same. That isn't true,
Mhm.
right? So
Mhm.
it's even though that's sort of what it sounds like when I write a book, the list. So if it's the same, it's a pattern. But if it's similar
Mhm.
enough, it could be a pattern.
Mhm.
Usually you have to be familiar with what crimes they are. And some
Mhm.
people will commit multiple types of crime, like steal a car,
Mhm.
do something else. But I think that's the thing. It isn't really scientifically shown. I've done a lot of reading and research on how do we identify patterns, comparative case analysis, but it's not very scientific. So
Mhm.
it really is to to develop your own logic. But
Mhm.
I would have to say I never had said something was a pattern and someone said they proved it wasn't. That's
Right,
the other
right.
part about it, so you'll find out. And also, some of the patterns are outside your jurisdiction. So say you see something, you check to see if you have anything like it.
Yeah.
Things like
I
that.
think you're giving people freedom right now because a lot of analysts who I work with are afraid that they're missing some major strategy or major methodology, and they're just like, how do I, what's my step one, my step two to do? And you mentioned your book. I want to actually show everybody the book. It's called Elements of Crime Patterns. You can, I know it'll go out of sync as soon as I move myself around a little bit. Um, but what I like about this is, you're putting together a tool for analysts to really have freedom in their thinking, right? Yes, we can follow a certain set of processes. We can say, is there a temporal relationship? Is there a spatial relationship? What are the key characteristics of the offender? What are the key characteristics of the victim, right? Um, and so we can certainly kind of follow through some of that, but there is such a difference between academia and application. And so that's really where I think you're offering analysts freedom to recognize that although something is written in a book a certain way, in reality it might be different. It might be just your curiosity that allows you to get to the next level. One of the things that I loved that your book did, it talked about specific crimes. So I know it's going to be tough to see here, but there's, for instance, in chapter 30, it talks about assaults, right? And here are some assault patterns and some MO variables to think about as you analyze a crime. In this case, the assaults. And you talked about the aftermath and the, active shooter incidents. So you give some real examples in here that get people thinking, as well as additional reading resources for them, which I thought was really nice. So if a person wants to grow in a particular area, maybe they are the person crime analyst for their agency and they look at murders, rapes, robberies, assaults, then maybe they want to dig into some of these additional reading resources that you've provided for them. What what was your thinking when you were writing this book? What purpose does this book have? What problem is it solving for the analytical community?
Well, for me, when I was looking to read things before I got started my job as a crime analyst in 1997, there wasn't anything basic. And then I would think, even though people did add to the field and the profession, there wasn't things to say, what are we doing? Just technical instructions. To me, that's what it seemed like, compared to when I was a behavior analyst. So
Mhm,
in the field of psychology, there's tons of things written, and crime analysis is still a baby. Crime and
mhm,
intelligence analysis is really a young profession. And it was like, if I went out to study birds, I could find a book that shows me the nests they live in, the food they eat, and probably the poop they do,
mhm.
everything. And then I could be looking for, or I could see these things and
Yeah.
say, this bird. So in this way, the book is to say, this is what's in a pattern.
Mhm.
And why I include the crimes was that I was a behavior specialist, and the crime is part of the pattern. The type of crime
Sure.
could be more than one crime is part of the
Mhm.
pattern. Like say a rapist could also steal jewelry.
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
and or whatever, there could be multiple crimes. Or so I wanted to say that it's not just the crime that happened in the law that was broken. It's to think about, what did the criminal do before the crime,
Mhm,
what
mhm.
was during, and what was after. And as someone who is a behavior specialist, I also think there's so much more emphasis on, well, why did they do it? We need to know the motive, like in the TV shows and movies.
Yeah.
Or if you do a profile and you figure it all out, you're going to find them. Well, you're not going to find the person that you don't know, but you could see behaviors. They're
Mhm.
observable and recordable. And there's so much information we have on what actually happened to see. We can't know what's in someone's head. So to me, I had this idea, it didn't exist. And when I found out ChatGPT could help me
Mhm.
flesh out things, I I said, I could get this out of my mind and create it for someone as maybe not the perfect book, but as a model of
Mhm.
how could we
Mhm.
think about this differently. And I just thought that I wish I had it. So that's why.
Yeah, yeah. It's great. So you've talked about a couple of things I just want to highlight here because I think they're really important. When analysts look at data, sometimes they're looking at all the assaults, all the burglaries, all the this, right? And they're sorting literally by, let me look at all the robberies that occurred, right? And you've introduced an idea that says, hold on, before you do that, let's think about the behavior. Whatever we categorize it as doesn't matter necessarily. We shouldn't include or exclude based on the particular crime type, but instead looking at the person's behavior. So if the behavior is seeking control, if the behavior is necessary for the completion of this person's cycle of behavior, right? If the theft of the vehicle is necessary for them to do the kidnapping, then we should be looking at the theft of the vehicle and the kidnapping, right? So the behavior piece comes into play. Um, this is really the root of analysis, right? Studying someone's behavior. We look at where they live, work, and play. We look at sometimes motivation, but like, are they motivated by drugs, or are they upset with their partner, or whatever it might be, um, as a piece of the behavioral pattern, right? Instead of as the driver, I think is what you're saying of the study.
Or the way, a key to the investigation. I mean,
Mhm,
because we can't look at the suspect and know, we can't look at a pool of suspects and know.
mhm.
I mean, it could say if someone, it looks like someone is a drug addict, then it's the drug
Right.
addict might be
Mhm,
likely. But I also think it just reminds me too, is attempted crimes are
mhm.
key. And sometimes they're
Yeah.
not, like say in New York State, like vandalism might be called criminal mischief. But say
Mhm,
someone's trying to get in
mhm,
and then they're really a burglar and you don't know that. And so there's really a bigger pattern. And usually, for the most part, I refer to pattern, not so much as geography. So if you have a hotspot, you're going to still have to look to see if it might be the same person. You're going to have to look for other variables of,
mhm,
did they use the same tools? Did they
mhm,
weapon, whatever? And then, but I think of it as the same person committing similar crimes is
mhm.
criminal, no matter what it is, whether a serial drug dealer, a serial money launderer, but many crimes combine crimes too. So money launderers stealing money some way, right? Fraud,
Mhm.
usually things like that. So
Exactly. And so, going back to that, it doesn't matter what the crime type is, it matters what the behavior is, because the crime type could change, it could evolve, it could require a different level of, skill, right? If a skill is acquired, now you have a different kind of crime. But what we're really looking at is the behavior of the person, right? And why that be, or how that behavior can help us indicate, predictive pieces, right?
mhm.
And so I do like the idea of, we use mapping, right? There's so much around mapping. At least in the last 10 years, I've seen multiple agencies rely on mapping for their analysis. And you're like, hold on, the hotspot isn't necessarily the only thing that you're analyzing,
Right.
because this individual could be certainly doing the activity, like you mentioned earlier, in another community, or in another hot zone, right? Or a non-hot zone. And so using spatial analysis, but not relying on it as the only indicator of a potential series, I think is important. What what are the biggest challenges you think analysts face when analyzing a crime pattern?
Well, is the confidence that
Mhm.
you don't need 5 crimes to say it's a pattern.
Right.
And you say these, I would always say, because I usually did a weekly newsletter, or if I thought it was a pattern, I might do a bulletin, if it
Mhm.
was, but I might include it in the newsletter too. But just say these look related. You don't
Mhm.
have to say I know they're related. There's no way you can know anyway. I
Mhm.
mean, you just say why, and you show, like, in a table, what are the
Mhm.
variables that show you that. And like you said, crimes that occur in a time pattern, that's one way you would know it might more likely be a series. Same with, you usually only have this many of a certain kind of crime and suddenly you have a spike.
Mhm.
That would be, statistically, you might say, well,
Yep.
what's going on here?
Mhm.
It's kind of strange, but you just show you're, and that's all you have to do.
Yeah, yeah.
You don't need to be proving it. Now, if you could do some kind of predictive analysis, people like that, but
Mhm.
you're not going to be able to do it in many crime patterns. So don't wait for the big, wonderful, giant
Yep.
crime pattern to prove you know how to be an analyst, because it might not even happen.
Mhm.
Because you need the data gathered. And the other part is, one thing that's bad when you have a big analysis center and you don't have access to the officers, which is an advantage to a smaller agency, you can get more information, which is why I wrote my book too. You need more information. You're missing
Mhm.
patterns. I'm right in, I think it's an introduction. There was a rapist who struck in an elevator and in a hallway,
Mhm.
right? They're like similar. They're not the same, but they're
Yep.
places in between floors.
Yep.
Oh, a
Yep.
stairwell, not a hallway.
Mhm.
So what you want to go find out more, if you can get more cases or more information, you need to
Mhm.
know people, call them up, or even network with other analysts in other jurisdictions just to chat. I mean, so that's where networking pays off, and
Yeah.
also being open to not going afraid to go up to the burglary squad or whatever you have, proper
Mhm.
crime unit, and talk
So
to
you
people.
Yeah, this is liquid gold for folks who are, this is gold, right? Because the reality is a lot of analysts will stay in their office and just analyze and that's it. And then they kick out a report and they're like, please, somebody read it, right? And so what you're really proposing is, one, the freedom comes back, right? Like you're guessing based on your expertise, based on what you're good at, what the thinking of an analyst. It's not an exact science. And so really allowing them some freedom to say, you're not here to identify the exact suspect when they're going to hit at the exact moment, again, because you might not have all the pieces of that puzzle. Maybe they haven't been reported yet, right? To give you multiple components that you might have multiple components that are missing, first of all. And so that first chunk of freedom, that conversation that you're having about, it's not about perfection. It's about having the confidence to say from the professional guest, like the not I'm just, kind of guessing, but the professional guess, right? Allowing some freedom for it to be right or wrong, but a movement in the right direction. That confidence is movement in the right direction is that first component. And then the second component you're talking about, which I love, is get out of your office, right? Get out of your office, talk to people, talk to neighboring communities, talk to detectives in a certain squad that you might be helping with the investigation, whether you're a large or a small agency, because some pieces might be missing and that aren't written in the report. So having those conversations and having that flow is going to allow for a more quality analysis. So if folks walk away with those two components, right, the freedom to study behavior in a way that recognizes that it's not black and white, right? And then that get out of your office and connect with these investigators and these officers and these other analysts, is key. It's key to the success in all of this. Yeah. So I love that piece of it.
Well, and there's even more, to just look at other data too,
Mhm.
or even go out in the community, because there was a series of arsons and they took place on a dead end street, but now I
Yep.
couldn't really see that in a real map. Like you're seeing lines, or you're
Yes.
you're not, so not that you should go in a dangerous neighborhood by
Yeah.
yourself, but you could go on a day, and and also network with the intelligence unit if you have one, or whatever you have. It might be one person, but
Mhm.
become friends with them. And so you'll, one of the difficulties in my early days too is, and almost all the whole time, because I was in a city of like 1,000 officers and one analyst,
Mhm.
right? But
Oh, wow.
I didn't know who the players were. So sometimes maybe I would say this is happening, but I couldn't flesh it out with all
Mhm.
the information. Like, this looks like this is, so and so got out of jail, and
Yep.
were known to do this, and that's also the other thing, is tracking MOs of people who are arrested.
Mhm.
We don't really do that. So to me, the modus operandi, how a person commits a crime, in my experience, is often repeated. It might not,
Yes.
certainly isn't. There's academic studies. This is, like you said, is so important. This is not academic. You do
Mhm.
not have to prove anything. And you don't
Mhm.
even have to be so expert. Like you said, show them you're an expert analyst. You are analyzing data. I analyze the data. I see these similarities. This
Mhm.
might be this looks like a pattern.
Yep.
Nobody's gonna kill you, or and then
Yeah.
you could include a map and,
Right, right.
whatever else you can do with your tools. But I
Mhm.
also think one things so important that I worry about for the future, and it already happened, is, and it happened when I was an analyst, is the analyst being the technologist and not the thinker,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
not the one who's adding the value. It's, oh, I know how to do this. Give this to this person. Fortunately
Mhm.
for me, I'm a jack of all trades and master of none, and I didn't even know how to type. They
Yeah.
would never hire me in any kind of current role as I was back then. I mean, I could type, but I
Yeah,
still
yeah.
don't know how to type. But I mean, I don't have, I learned everything on the job, but I'm
Mhm.
not ever going to be the super guru of
Yeah.
databases and all
Mhm.
that. But that if you're going to become that, you're not an analyst. That's my
Mhm.
opinion. So I'm sorry to say, or if you're so good at taking the cell phone data, and you can do it, and you can find the patterns using analyst notebook and that, but you're not thinking and you're not adding any
Mhm.
value, you're not an analyst. And
Mhm.
I'm sorry to, that's sad, but it's true. And
Mhm.
it's not really that hard to think.
Mhm.
And
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up a good point because I've had chiefs say, we can just buy some kind of technology. I've had other people ask, is AI going to take over crime analysis? Because we really
well,
need an analyst if we can press all the buttons. And the reality is, crime analysis is not technology. Crime analysis is thinking. And so, what your book really gets people to start to do is to think, whatever technologies they have, to think. And as we get more technologies, trust me, it's a lot easier to sort data in a certain way. But what I'm hearing you say is it's not about the sorting. That's just one way to help you process your thinking. But it really is the thinking about patterns and behaviors. And we all have them. We all wake up. I mean, I think about my daughter, right? She wakes up at a certain time. She brushes her teeth before she gets dressed. And, there's a pattern to her behavior that happens. When I taught for the college, and even when I teach a week-long class, people sit in the same seat every day that they started on Monday. And that's
right.
their pattern of behavior. And so, so we all have patterns. We all have ways of doing things. And so it's really important for us to be thinking about what is the pattern of not only our offenders, but the patterns of our victims. And
Yeah.
so, Debbie, when I think about I was helping IACA rebuild their tactical analysis or pattern identification course, and I reached out to you for help. I said, "Hey, I'm writing this course. I'm using your book as kind of a thinking model. It's not a book requirement, but I certainly used it in some of my thinking around building the course." And you and I talked about, I said, "Can you think of any assignments? Can you think of any, things that you'd want an analyst to do?" And you're like, "Have them think, have them go get their own crimes and go think about those crimes." And so, if someone were to walk away from this session here today and they wanted to start to do analysis, that probably would be the thinking, right? Go out, Google a case, Google, some crimes, and think about them.
Yeah. And I think questioning, like, so you're really an analyst asking, you see something and you question it. Is there more here?
Mhm.
Is this something, and digging, and also context, because context is everything. And that's where artificial intelligence won't ever really be able to
Mhm.
manufacture. Context is specific to situations, right? To jurisdictions, to agencies. You'll
Mhm.
know what's important for your agency. I mean, it takes time if you're new,
Mhm.
but and also sometimes you can create what's important by showing what you can do and seeing what sticks to the wall, right? Like, because
Exactly.
every agency won't use everything. And I think for analysts too, that's so important to know they're not a failure if their agency isn't doing what you learned at the ICA,
Yes.
IACA conference. This is the nirvana if you go to
Mhm.
everything.
Mhm.
What do you have in the real world? This is real world. And that's where you said your daughter does the same things I do. I don't purposely drive different directions to the same place,
Exactly.
to the grocery store. I
Mhm.
go this most efficient way. People learn. They're
Yep.
habitual creatures. But I think curiosity and questioning, and not in confidence, right?
Mhm, mhm. Absolutely. You mentioned something, too, that I think is important for folks is what's true for one analyst may not be true for another. We actually just had 19 analysts graduate from our online crime analysis school. And one of the things that I saw, because there were so many different people, is there were 5 analysts who revamped their systems. So they created more efficient systems. They had large amounts of data and they were analyzing certain crimes, right? And then we had a couple of other folks who didn't decide to go that path. They didn't find a need to revamp their technologies, because they didn't care about robberies. They had like one robbery every 6 years. Right. And so there was no point for them to do that. Instead, they focused on more administrative stuff. We had another analyst who wanted to really study operations and figure out how to best deploy, and how many officers they needed, and where they should be and what shifts they should be on, because that was the problem at their agency that analyst needed to solve. So when you say that, it's not going to be the same for everybody, and it's okay, and you have to learn your department, and what's important. And so, one of the things that I always encourage analysts to do when they're on an interview, is ask their chief or whoever they're on the interview with, what are your top 3 problems that you want to solve here in the city? What's the number one problem that you want to solve here in the city? And recognize that it might be different from the agency next door or the agency that you used to work for. So I want to ask you a question, though. I know we're getting close to our time here. I want to ask you a question. What do you say to the analysts who are studying and thinking through patterns, and they're afraid that they're going too deep into a rabbit hole? What do you say to that analyst? Huh.
Well, I mean, not to make it personal, right? I mean, like you said, it's setting priorities. So I would read. One thing different about working at the federal level and the local is I would read the newspaper and feel bad because here's the serial robber. Because when I was an analyst, the robbery rate has gone down a lot, but it was like 2,000 robberies a year. So I had robberies, and it would be like, oh, they're they're not getting this person and taking it personally. So the rabbit hole of overanalysis, though, I think you're talking about, I think
Yeah.
that can happen at any level of law
Mhm.
enforcement. I think that there's going to be people with the tendency. I don't have that tendency. So I would say you're the coach. What would you advise? Because I don't have that problem, because I more want to work smarter, not harder. So I'm never going to work extra over,
Yeah.
when it isn't needed. So what
Mhm.
would you advise to someone like that?
Well, there you go. You're turning it right back on me. All right. So I think, what I think it's not necessarily about, the process of overanalyzing. I think it's a confidence issue. I think it's the perfectionism that they're seeking, the confidence. If I don't give them everything, I'm not going to be enough. That's happening. And so when I see analysts overanalyzing, I say to them, take a step back look at the case in big picture form. And if you were the officer, what are the top three things that you would want to know? Or if you're the detective, what are the best three leads that you have? Right? Because I think that analysts tend to get into this mindset that they're not good enough, that they don't belong as part of the team because they're probably not sworn. And so they try to overcompensate by digging deeper and deeper and deeper and trying to deliver something of value. And so part of it is just taking a breath, realizing that it's not an exact science, realizing that your contribution is of value and you don't have to work so hard that you don't sleep at night. Right?
Yeah, and I think too, there's that, like when people say to make a product bluff, bottom line up front.
Yes.
My experience is officers and leaders at every
Mhm,
level do not want too much,
mhm,
a real lot of information. So your challenge as an analyst too is to summarize a lot of information in a very short form. So
mhm.
no one's going to know. That is the hard part about being an analyst too. One of them is that no one knows how hard you work to get this little
Yeah.
document. But that means you're successful, and you really can't. You have to have intrinsic motivation. I'm
Yes.
sorry. I don't know how you could do it, because it's just no one
Yeah.
really understands what you're doing, unless you're in a unit, but they still are looking at their own, and everyone has their own way of doing things too. So,
Exactly.
like, I think
Exactly.
it's important to know that, like, we are real people.
Mhm,
Agencies are different. And like you said, maybe your agency wants one thing, but I think it is important to show an agency what you can do, but
mhm,
not push it. You're not going to make them let you do it.
mhm,
But if you don't
mhm,
show them, they will never know either, because a lot of agencies don't realize the capabilities, the
mhm,
capacity that
mhm.
could be derived from a good analysis. So
Yeah, absolutely. And many analysts don't even know what they're capable of. And so one of the things that we talk about in our crime analysis school is we make sure that the analysts know their purpose. And we shy away from the what, right? So when I ask an analyst, what do you, what's your role? What's your contribution? Who are you? What's a crime analyst? And they say things like, I complete ComStat, or I run statistics, and I'm like, those are things. I'm asking you about your purpose. And they say, well, I create the bulletins. Well, who cares if you create bulletins? What's the purpose of what you're doing? And so we always try to get analysts really nailing down their contribution, in the sense of, I provide thinking, I provide value, I provide a different perspective to our officers, to our detectives, to deploy better, smarter, more efficiently. And that's the purpose. And who cares if it's through a bulletin, a ComStat presentation, or a napkin, right? The key
right.
is to be thinking and delivering a different perspective in a way that, provides just that, a different analytical perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would even take it for myself at an even different level, as I think it can make the world safer. And I didn't want, like, as a mother, or as,
Mhm.
with relatives, I don't want people to be victimized. I just don't. So that was
Yeah.
be my purpose. And
Yeah.
if I could help a little way, which is why too I would write this book, is just if I could help a few people
Hmm.
think differently and stop somebody from getting raped or assaulted, or
Hmm.
just victimized, because it's very traumatic to
Yeah.
people. So that's
You know, that's a great point. That's a great point. And bringing it to that personal level is, we might be looking at these crimes on a piece of paper or in a computer, but the reality is these are humans. These are people. These are families. These are aunts and uncles and sisters and brothers and, children, our children, other people's children. And so, yeah, bringing it back to that why, that purpose. I'm thinking differently. I'm thinking about patterns. I'm thinking about this to create less opportunities for crime, right? To catch the folks. So thank you, Debbie. I'm so happy that you wrote this book, and I love that you used ChatGPT and you're transparent about that, saying really being authentic in delivering a legacy piece for folks, and utilizing tools like ChatGPT, utilizing AI as a tool to deliver your message, right? And so I really appreciate that, folks. You can get this on Amazon. Any special spot that you like them to get this, Debbie?
Oh no, you just Google it. I mean, put it on Amazon, elements of crime patterns, and you'll
Yep,
find it.
and it pops
That's
right
it.
up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank
So
you.
it's been a pleasure having you here. And thank you for the value that you're bringing to the entire analytical community through the work that you have done and the work that you are doing through this book. And I'm sure through other publications that will be somewhere down the line for the rest of us to gobble up some of your great experiences. So thank you so much for being here with us today. I appreciate you so, so much.
I appreciate it too. Bye bye.
All right.